Good evening. Welcome to Peace and Knowledge, Thursday English meeting. What should I say that I haven't said already? Welcome. All right, let's get started. We'll start with a reading from Happy Life, followed by our opening prayer. Then we'll have our presentation, followed by vibrations and passes. Oh, they make me sound even better. I like that. All right, so let's begin. Always put your trust in divine help. Should you feel besieged with no way out, help will arrive from God. Never doubt the divine paternity. God watches over and helps you, not always as you would like, but in the way that is best for your true happiness. At times, it may seem that divine help will not arrive or will arrive too late. But afterward, if you waited, you will see that it did arrive a short time before. And I forgot to say, if you have your phones, please put them on vibrate or silence so we're not interrupted. So we'll have our opening prayer now. Heavenly Father, as we begin our meeting tonight, we thank you for this opportunity to meet. Guide our hearts and minds as we listen to the speaker tonight. And may his words help us through the coming days. Watch over us each and every day and make us your example here on earth. And as we begin, we say the words Jesus taught us, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. So now I'd like to invite our speaker for the evening, Mr. Al Turri, to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. As always, I can't take any credit for what I'm going to share with you tonight. All of the materials from chapter 5 in a book called Existential Conflicts that was psychographed by Devaldo Franco from the Spirit, Joanna De Angelis. How many of you have read some of Joanna's teachings? A few of you, huh? Is it hard? Yeah, maybe. For me, it is. Maybe not. Maybe not for everybody. But to me, when I read books that she's dictated, it reminds me of graduate school. There's a whole lot of detail. She goes from the beginning all the way to the extreme possible cases in this book, anyways, right? Because existential conflicts, right? She goes to the extreme possibilities. And I'd say for most of us, as we talk about this, we're somewhere in the middle, right? We're not the least of the cases. We're not the most extreme. So I'm going to try to focus on the stuff that applies to most of us. The beautiful thing about Joanna's work, though, is she always finishes with a solution, always provides a solution, gives us some steps. So I always feel very touched and emotional. Um, Not scared, but man, I hope that never happens to me, or I remember how this happened to me, or someone I know. And then she lifts you out of that with hope and a recipe for improvement. So let's jump in and get started. I'm going to set this down so I don't spill it. There we go. All right. So sometimes I think it's helpful to get a secular or a dictionary.com definition of a word that we're going to talk about, because the whole chapter is about resentment. And dictionary.com tells us that it's a feeling of displeasure or indignation. It's some act, remark, person, etc., regarded as causing the injury or insult. So if I feel resentment towards you, it's because something you did or said or maybe didn't do has caused me to feel injured by you or insulted by you, or vice versa. Maybe something I say tonight will hurt your feelings and you'll resent me for it. That's the idea. How many of you have ever felt resentment in your life? A little bit, maybe. How many of you think you've caused others to feel resentment towards you? A little bit, right? Exactly. I think we all are on both sides of this fence. All right. The beauty of this, though, is whatever we did or whatever we experienced from others. Typically, if you think about it, the event itself, how many times did it happen? Typically once, right? In most cases. I mean, one person could have done multiple things to you, but one event that you might be holding resentment towards happened once. But every time we think about it, every time we relive it, every time we have negative thoughts towards the person that did it, we're actually reliving it, right? We're committing it to ourselves again, and we're hurting ourselves again. So the goal tonight is to understand how this can happen to anybody and how we can cause it to be, we can inflict it on others. And if it's left unchecked, it can wreak havoc on our lives. and increase our suffering more than it needs to be. So let's jump into Joanna's words. Um, she starts the chapter with, like I said from the beginning, right? Not this life necessarily, not the human experience, but the spirit, right? And essentially, what she teaches us is underlying this individual consciousness of ours, right? There exists rather a need for power, and that sentence itself sounds bad, right? Power is a bad thing. We perceive that when we read these things, I think. But what she's telling us is power in this instance is neither good nor bad. It's like money, right? Money is not evil. It's what we do in pursuit of money, or it's what we do in pursuit of not going broke necessarily. The commodity itself is not necessarily bad. Just in this case, she's talking about power being the fundamental fact of self accomplishment. Our inert need for power drives us to accomplish things. Now, those accomplishments can be negative or positive, right? So we're not casting judgment on it. Simply saying that this drive or this need for power is what drives us to accomplish things. It helps us develop our intelligence, our will, our moral character. Because of the conquests that occur that involve emotions, right? We all face opportunities every day with our experiences, feelings and emotions of success or failure, right? And we have to live with those. We have to experience those and embark down the road of the consequences of those emotions. So all of these things help us improve and get better. She also points out that this drive for power helps us deal with our ego and develop strategies to achieve things and overcome the ego or succumb to it as well in certain situations. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Then she explains that this innate drive for power, this desire for power, then develops anxiety, right? Because during the human experience, most notably, it's inherent to them, where we have this ability or this desire to get power, to grow, we're ambitious, and this anxiety for trying to achieve things creates conflict internally, externally, because now we're dealing with this inert need to achieve power. We're anxious because we're on this path of trying to achieve power and achieve things, creating conflict if we go about it in an unbalanced way. Think about if we think about power for a minute. Let's just think about our job, right? We're an employee. We probably have a boss. Maybe we have people that we supervise, and that American dream, right? Um, the company ladder, right? Driving for success. So in our pursuit of power, if we do that unbalanced, in other words, we throw other people under the bus, we take credit for other people's accomplishments, we take shortcuts, right? We hurt others trying to grow. That would be unbalanced, and that would be a bad example of how power is a bad thing, right? The pursuit of power can be bad and lead to resentments of all kinds. Or the other approach where you climb the ladder helping others, doing good for others, supporting others without hurting them. So that's just an example of balanced versus unbalanced. But essentially, she reminds us that this desire or this fight for power, she says, it's essentially the essential reason for human existence, right? At our core, what are we striving for? Happiness and well-being, she tells us, and that's very natural. That's very human. It's very, very much the nature of what and who we are. We're striving for um, balance. We're striving for peace, less suffering, well-being, and happiness. And if we balance this drive for power balance in a balanced way, we can achieve these things with less suffering. Then she defines true power, and she does a much better job than I did a few minutes ago, I think, in the sense that it's right here in black and white or white and blue, right? True power, all right? It's not financial resources, right? It's not social or political status. It's not religion. It's not in religion or culture, but rather it's in the internal conquest of joy for self-realization, right? I this is going to sound funny, I think. As I was preparing this talk, it brought up a lot of history for me and some current struggles, not struggles, I guess, experiences that I'm going through through few personal relationships. Um, and I felt bad, right, because of this. And then I felt joy. I totally understood what she meant by this sentence. I actually felt joy when I realized that I've still got some of these issues, because now that I've reminded myself or realized that I'm still experiencing these issues, I got really happy because now I can try to fix them better, if that makes sense. Good evening. How are you? Um, so, and then the last sentence, right, is especially one manages to conquer with love. And that's why I felt that joy, because some of these issues I'm facing that I'm sure we're all facing in some way involve um, conflict that can be painful or whatever. If we could turn that off, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was blinding me. I can go. You want me to go get my shades? No, because we can leave them on. Yeah, thank you very much. Um, um, so the reason I felt this joy in this, especially with this last sentence, is it dawned on me that some of these issues that I'm sure we all deal with in our lifetime, um, it really comes down to conquering those issues with love, um, like Christ taught us, right? Loving our enemy, turning the other cheek, treating others the way we want to be treated, and those couple of issues happening in my life are going to be a lot easier for me now to endure or to work through because I prepared for this talk. It was very joyful to put this on paper. She goes on then to talk about the fight for power. That this power is not the stuff we think of, right? Here, right? It's not these financial things or social status or what have you, but it really is um, advancing us towards this feeling of happiness, right? But all too often in our daily existence as humans, right? What happens? We're trying to get better. We're trying to advance. We're trying to improve. What happens? An obstacle is presented to us. Someone gets in our way. Someone impedes our ability. It's thwarted, to use her word, right? And what happens? What can easily happen in these situations? We can rebel. We can develop rancor towards people. We can develop a desire to see them hurt, to see them fail, because our ego gets bruised, right? And as a result of not getting the promotion, or someone else getting credit for our work, or someone else making a decision that hurt us financially or emotionally, we develop hate or spite, ultimately leading to resentment, which is what this chapter is about. It's very easy to hold resentment towards people that hurt you if you let it fester, is what she teaches us. And she tells us that this failure is that's lodged in our mind, right? Remember, the occurrence typically that caused the emotions happened once, but we let it fester. We think about it. We lose sleep about it. We relive it over and over. Um, and that is just the same as if the person did it 20 times, right? If we relive it 20 times. So this gets lodged in our mind, and it can lead to what she calls the cowardly expression of revenge. What can I do to get back at that person? What can I do to feel better about their failure? How can I help them fail? And if we do that, it leads to unhappiness, wanting to create unhappiness for the one that offended us. But ultimately, that leads to unhappiness for us, because that resentment just builds and builds. And what you give is what you get, right? And this is so true. I can remember years ago in business having a competitor that we would just go back and forth, competing with each other with ads in the newspaper and business tactics and whatever. And the more I went after him, the more I suffered, right? Because I was throwing stones, right? And I was getting stones. And this really hit home with that. Luckily, I don't throw stones anymore. I'm moving on. Um, and she reminds us, right, what we were just talking about, that emotion, that initial pain or hurt that started the whole thing eventually gets lodged in our memory, right? It's stuck and leads to the individual that experienced that initial emotion that won't let it go to cruelty, right? They become cruel. They lose the ability to look at these things logically. They lose discernment. And they really focus, or we really focus our attention on that bad behavior that occurred to us. And ultimately, this leads to that harmful flow of resentment, increasing in us over and over. And ultimately, provokes an emotional and can lead to physiological disorders. So we'll talk about some worst case scenarios in a minute briefly, but few of us in this room probably get those physiological disorders or those mental disorders, but we all can carry depression, anxiety, stress, right? All those things are all forms of mental health concerns or mental well-being, but not necessarily, leading to more advanced conditions, as she does talk about in this chapter. She reminds us then that there's a structure to this, that initial frustration from the emotional pain that you suffered. Initially, there might be some displeasure. Then there might be a confrontation with the person that hurt you, or you being aggressive towards that person that hurt you for revenge, ultimately leading you to experience sorrow about not only the event, but perhaps your actions or the consequences of your retaliation, which then leads to distress, right? Maybe jail time if you go too far, right? And then ultimately resentment towards this person long term, and perhaps towards yourself as well, right? For the actions that you may have taken. She reminds us that because we're spirit first and human in this lifetime, that this human existence that we're living, right, is also experiencing a spiritual existence, and that within the spirit lies either a dormant angel or a dormant demon, to use her words, right? And that if we feed the demon, right, if we live with resentment, if we seek revenge, if we don't let things go, if we don't forgive, if we don't conquer with love, that we are feeding this demon, right? And I'm not talking, horns and a tail and a pitchfork, but I'm going to get you, and doing bad things to try to hurt people, or talking bad about others to get back at them. How many of you see that on Facebook all the time? Man, sometimes I just want to delete that thing because there's so much back and forth. All right. Then she starts talking about a little bit of the cure, right? As she always does. She reminds us that if we can live our lives based in love for ourselves, love for God, love for others, that's how we overcome the emptiness and the lack of meaning, right? Which results from that dissatisfaction, from the resentment that we're carrying. If we can live a life based in love, that's the trick. That's the key to trying to overcome this. Because she reminds us that ultimately, right, suffering is the human condition, right? If we're on earth in a human body, we're going to suffer, right? That degree of our suffering, which is determined by choices we've made previously, not just in this life, but in other lives, that cause and effect, right? Determination of the future puts us right where we are, right? Ultimately, she reminds us that you're going to suffer if you're on earth, right? But resentment intensifies it. The more you hold a grudge, the more you don't let go or forgive, the stronger the suffering is going to be. And the only way to really overcome this is getting through it with love, right? Because if you can get to the point to where you understand, man, I'm doing this and it's irrational. The better choice would be this. It just helps you make better choices. And with those better choices, what do we create? A better reality tomorrow, right? If I make better choices today than I did yesterday, tomorrow, in most cases, is going to be better. Make sense? Awesome. So she reminds us, resentment, you can try. You can try to make better choices, but until you really forgive or really grow past it, the resentment can remain. And if it does remain, it can leave a dark shadow. How many of you saw that movie Ghost years ago, right? And when I read this, I thought of the dark shadows in that movie where the bad guys were spirits and being dragged away, right? Those dark shadows, right? If we hang on to resentment, we're going to have this shadow over us, this cloud that's going to not allow us to necessarily improve. It's probably going to aggravate our condition. It's going to increase some of the behavior that leads to this. But if we can release the resentment and take steps towards balance, towards equilibrium, that's how we're going to start to live less of a victim of this and more proactively from love and leading us towards this well-being and health that is capable or possible for all of us. She also tells us that this resentment, these disturbing feelings that we're hanging on to, that we haven't left behind us, stem and contribute to unresolved conflicts. Uh, I can speak only for me, right? But I can think of two or three cases where I'm still dealing with some of this. And in reading this, it hit home because in my mind, I'm doing everything I can to resolve this one situation. But have I really done everything, right? After reading this, I really think I'm the number two on the list here. I'm really enslaved in this situation with my sister, and it's definitely going to slow my evolution. Um, it's hard to talk to someone that doesn't want to talk to you, right? And that's fine. I can't force that, right? But am I praying enough for her? Am I praying enough for me to get over the pain, of our situation? I haven't been doing that enough. I've just resided in the fact that, hey, she doesn't want to talk to me. I can't knock down her door and make her listen, right? Um, and I've just let it be. All the things in some of these slides we'll talk about totally reminded me of this situation. But it's not going to bring me down anymore because I can do more to overcome this, even though I can't necessarily talk to this person. Because I have the ability, just like Joanna tells us, right? These disturbances that we all encounter, um, they can last for lifetimes if we let them, or they can last for hours or days. We have the ability to end our suffering or to reduce our suffering in how we face these challenges. And we all have different situations, right? We all have different experiences. But at the end of the day, we all have similar situations in the sense that we can control how much we suffer in many ways, or the length of time that we have to suffer. Just like it says, right? We determine the latency and the associated guilt that follows by the choices that we make. And this is important, right? This is where I think a trap we can all fall into, right? We get to this point where the situation's occurring, whatever it might be, something minor, something more serious, right? But whatever it is, it makes us feel like someone's wronged us, right? Or someone's done us harm. And it's very easy for the guilt of this situation to get transferred to resentment, right? Towards making us feel that it's always the other person's fault and we can't see our contribution to it. So much so that it perpetuates the problem itself because it prevents us from going that extra mile. It prevents us from doing all that we can, perhaps, to end the resentment. To the extreme that she talks about, where we're plotting revenge, right? Which leads to much anxiety. Now, I'm not anywhere close to plotting revenge in my situation at the moment. And if I go back to some of those extreme cases in business, I don't think I was ever plotting revenge or wanting to hurt somebody. But she tells us that it can go this far to where you can plot revenge, where you're planning terrible things for these people that you think hurt you. And hopefully we never get to that point. But it's possible if we don't stop. She reminds us that the behavior is linked, right, to the level of consciousness of the person. So in my example, my consciousness about this whole issue that I'm going through totally changed a couple of days ago as I was wrapping this up, right? And you all have the ability, we all have the ability of whatever we're going through to change our level of consciousness on a particular situation. If we don't, we will continue to perceive ourselves as the victim in these situations, to where we feel like we're the one that's wrong, we're the one that's superior, the other person owes us an apology, the other person should be doing more to resolve this, because we're the injured party, we're the wrong party, right? Which just keeps perpetuating itself. The more and more we stay in that stance of I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. There's nothing more I should have to do in this situation because it's not my fault. And the more we stay in that situation, the lower our consciousness is, and the more we're entrenched or enslaved by this resentment. She then goes on to define bad-tempered individuals. How many of you know bad-tempered individuals? A few of us, right? A few of us. She says they're characterized by the weakness of their psychological organization, responsible for functional disturbances and they tend to accept existential challenges as provocations and instigations to their affliction. That's a lot of words, but what that means to me, right, is you know the person, right, and you may even been one at some point in your life, right? I'm trying to think if I have, maybe I have, but or maybe we just have days where no matter what happens, everything that comes out of our mouth or out of our head is negative. You know, from the time you spilled the coffee in the morning to the time your kid um, left the shoe on the floor and you tripped and you cut your head because you fell, right? To the guy that cut you off on the highway, to you name it, right? It's always other people doing things that lead you to do bad things or have bad experiences, right? And this bad tempered individual can be maybe from hours to days to lifetimes. And I think we all bump into people that are just cranky and ill tempered and always mad at the world, where they almost seem to attack you before you even have a chance to say good morning or say hello. Right? They're just mad at the world. And these would be these worst case scenarios that she talks about, right? But they're characterized by this weakness of their psychological organization. They're just always negative, right? Um, she says that this can go on to bear several complexes, including inferiority complexes. So she mentions I couldn't list them all, but talks about many different psychological disturbances and mental health conditions that can be very extreme and dangerous, right? And these can manifest themselves by by simple stuff all the way to multiple, several serious complexes, and these people that experience these conditions, right, really believe they're the victim, regardless of what they've done. Um, they don't see things logically or rationally anymore. They're always on edge. They're always ready to attack before someone has a chance to hurt them, um, and they're always insecure and suspicious. Right, and again, these are extreme cases. So I'm not saying any of you are going through this, but we could all have the ability to advance to these situations if we're not careful, or we can all come into contact with these types of people. And she's going to give us some tips on how to lessen this as we go ahead. She then says, look, those are all very serious. These are serious situations, right? We're all can be victims of this, or we can all fall into this as we grow, as we live our life. She says, and we're more prone to this, right? If we're not able to love, right? If we're not able to love, right, then we probably don't consider ourselves loved, right? People that just can't love their fellow man, that can't show affection or have good feelings towards other. If they're always mad at the world, always angry at the world, um, then more than likely they perceive themselves as not loved, and they more than likely will perceive anything that's connected to them, right? That comes to them from others. It's other people's fault as opposed to their own. That there's nothing that they've done to create their lot in life or their situation, and you believe it. It's so ingrained in your everyday actions that the world is against you and the world is out to get you, and everything that goes wrong is someone else's fault. And then she talks about this can grow. This neurosis can grow, constantly making the person with this neurosis um, searching for explanations. There's no solution to their problems, and they're always going to revolt at you can come to them with solutions. You can go to this person and say, hey, I see this or I see that, or you're doing this or you're doing that, and regardless of what you bring to them, no matter how logical or loving it could be, their first response is to assume that it's negative, that it's going to hurt them, they're trying to get them, and they're just going to oppose it and not even consider the situation. She reminds us, though, that in these most extreme instances, that the individual will become mentally fixated, right, and just bitterness takes over. Um, the, the the downside to this are multiple, right? In addition to poor interhuman relations, right, and poor health in the sense that if you're always stressed and anxious and angry, it leads to health issues, it leads to poor sleep. And then to a bigger situation, right, it opens the door for obsessive attachments, right? When we live our lives in resentment, when we live our life from a place that's not grounded in love, as these situations um, evolve and become worse, we can be left wide open for spiritual attachments, or what Spiritism calls um, obsessors, right? Where we start to feel not only our emotions and issues, but this spiritual entity can influence our thoughts and our actions to some degree, and just makes the situation even worse, right? The person that's going through the situation doesn't even realize that this phenomenon is occurring. And that during the process, right, there's a mixture of feelings for the person. Um, and you don't have to raise your hand. I'm not going to ask you, but just for full disclosure, I've definitely experienced this process. And fortunately, here at the center, we've got fraternal counseling. We have a disobsession meeting that helps. Um, there's help if you go through this, if these issues. But I could remember um, in these situations actions that occurred that, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I broke the law or I killed anyone or went crazy necessarily, but I can remember actions, things that came out of my mouth in situations that, looking back, it's like, where'd that come from? That's not me, right? So my point is, if we're not careful, right, just like she teaches us, we can be influenced by spirits where we do and say things that this doesn't make sense that we would do it, but it happens because we've lowered our energy so much that the obsessor uh, can induce us to do and say things uh, that obviously it's clear that we have a serious imbalance. Fortunately, with some of the steps Joanna is going to tell us next, um, and help here physically as well as spiritually, we can overcome these things and rid ourselves of these obsessors. Um, Unfortunately, when we're in the midst of that, these deeper disturbances become inevitable, right? As you're going through that, you really become um, closed off to solutions. Um, you become closed off to invitations maybe to get help. You're imbalanced, and your behavior, if left unchecked, can just continue to become more and more um, not in my case, but in severe cases, violent reactions, at the very least, um, um, acknowledgement or suggestion for people that you should go and maybe get therapy or go get help. And these people, if left unhelped, if they don't take that step to get help, will go through this life miserably and into the next life miserably, um, which creates a perpetual dejection and resentment on the person going through it. I can remember going through this one of these phases, and you just feel terrible about life. You feel terrible about yourself. At some issue, at some instances, you almost give up hope, like you're never going to get out of it. Um, and that's very well possible, right? Where you could be in this perpetual state for a long time. Um, you greet the world and those around you. You attack them first, as opposed to giving them a chance to attack you. And it's easy to justify this. I'm not going to say insane, but this illogical behavior, this behavior that just seems to keep repeating. But they justify it almost to the point where you think you want to be unhappy, you want it to get worse, where you don't want to come out of the chaos, because it can just simply capture you, if you will, and envelop you in this negative energy that you just stay in unless you get some help. So here's the good news, right? Here's where Joanna talks about.
So you're not making my night so far.
And that's one of the drawbacks, and I appreciate you saying that, because I've got to check myself in these, because you can go really deep. So I apologize if I know well, but think about it, right? If someone's in this room is going through something more serious, I don't want to trigger it and make it worse, right? So thank you for reminding. I know I appreciate it. But the point is, you're right. The good stuff is here. All right, are we ready for it? Um, And it sounds so easy when we read it, but we have to keep in mind that it's hard when you're in the depth of this, if you're wrapped up into this. But she tells us, look, it's easy, right? Everything can be easily solved with a healthy dose of understanding, tolerance, compassion, and liberation therapy. And we'll jump into that. And remember, she's talking to us now, the reader of this chapter. I think from the point of view of someone that's not going through this, but watching someone that is, that's interacting with someone that is, right? Um, all too often, when we encounter people with a bad attitude, when we encounter people with symptoms that we've described here, what do? No judgment, but what do? We walk around them. We get away from them. We don't go over to their house anymore. We don't pick up the phone and call them. It's real easy to move away from those people because they bring us down. They cause us stress. They cause us harm or sadness. And in this part of the book, she's really talking to those of us that are in a better place, telling us if more of us could just be understanding, if more of us could be more tolerant, if more of us could be more compassionate, right, and help with this liberation therapy, then we could help others in this situation. Didn't cast judgment. She wasn't telling us we were doing anything wrong, but that's my perception is, listen, this is how you can help those people, your brothers, your sisters. All right. She talks about positive psychology. And I didn't look this up. I meant to, but I don't think positive psychology was even talked about in psychology literature when Devaldo Franco psychographed this book. Right. That's how cool spiritism is. Right. You read stuff that was psychographed before it was even part of necessarily psychology today. I could go on and on with some of these things that always surprise me. But the cool thing here is positive psychology is real, right? There's books on it, there's science on it, and Joanna was talking about this and sharing this when this book was psychographed. She says we can all be therapists, right? Trying to understand the emotions of others by being optimistic with people, seeing the bright side, seeing a good future, always being kind. There's a story that has gone around Facebook and different social media for years, and I don't even know if it's true, right? Or maybe it's happened more than once, but it's about a guy that was walking to a bridge in New York City, I think, for the sole purpose of jumping off the bridge. He was just in a terrible place. He was ready to end his life. He didn't jump. And when he was asked why he didn't jump, he says, well, I was getting to that point where I was getting ready to get up on the wall, on the rail, and I was ready to do it. And as I was walking, this person passed, and they looked at me and they smiled, right? And that smile just broke my determination of the mission that I was on, and it stopped me. What's a smile? It's a simple act of kindness, right? That's all it took for this guy not to take the leap, to not jump, right? And that's what she's talking about. For those of us that are in these situations with family members or friends, she tells us that forgiving others is huge for not only the other person, but for us. So how many of us, and again, don't raise your hands. It's I'm just putting the question out there for you to ponder. But how many of us have situations that we haven't forgiven, right? From the heart, not just, oh, I forgive you, but from the heart. How many of us are carrying those injuries with us without forgiving? How many of us haven't been forgiven perhaps for the hurt someone caused us, right? And we're still living with that instead of letting it go. She tells us we should help other people find pleasure, right? Help them get outside in the sun, help them go for a walk, help them drive with the top down, whatever might spark them out of their depression or their resentment. Most importantly, or last, I should say, lastly, she says, giving others hope in helping them find faith. Now, you're going to help somebody that's really entrenched in this resentment and this negativity and this psychosis with just one event of kindness? Probably not, right? And it's not necessarily our job to save the world, but the opportunity presents itself as we identify people in need. All she's telling us is when we can to practice these things, right? And try to give other people hope in finding faith. My wife is going through a graduate program. She wants to be a social worker, so she's studying, and now she's on the phone 3 days a week for an internship with United Way. If you dial 211 on your phone, it gets to a call center with social workers or with call attendants that can then get you to social workers. The reason I tell you this is the way she describes these calls can be something that I would consider minor, where somebody's short $30 to pay the electric bill, which to me that doesn't seem real emotional, but for that person that doesn't have the $30, it's a big deal. Or these calls could be as serious as someone who lost their wife a month ago and hasn't been able to leave the home because they're so distraught, right? And they have no more money, they don't have the income, and they're ready to hurt themselves, right? Um, and the way she described it to me, so how do you deal with these things? You know, how do you leave them when you hang up? She said, and it was beautiful because it ties into this. She said, well, I always try to find one, and I think this is part of the training that they put her through. I always try to find one positive thing that they've told me, and I try to focus on that so that I can give them hope, right? And I do everything I can to funnel that call to the right resources so that person can get the $30, or the person that's on the street might get a shower and a room for the night. And it's amazing resources. If you've never used it, or if you ever run into people that are in need, it's an amazing resource. And all you have to do is dial 211 on your phone and you get to these people. The point is, the way she described this, she can't give the guy $30 herself. She can't go save the world. But in that moment, when she has their attention, when they're listening to her, she followed. She does what Joanna tells us. Just try to give people hope, help them find faith, and help them get through it. And we all have the ability to do this in our everyday life. She also says it's important to remember that the being itself, the person that we encounter that's negative, that's cranky, that's attacking you, that hates the world, that's suspicious, right? That is just having a bad day all the time. They're not the bearer of cruelty. They're a spirit, just like us. They're a spirit having a human experience, right? Living this current life. And they're not the bearer necessarily of cruelty. And that as part of our experience on earth, that if we can just simply remember it's they're just in a certain space right now. They're going through something. And if we can approach them with altruism, with kindness, in a moral way, and with cooperation, that it goes a long way for them finding that hope, or seeing a reason to smile, or maybe moving in a position where they're less illogical or irrational, and maybe they start to see the benefits of getting help. She goes on to talk about positive psychology and tells us that positive psychology can initiate a natural liberation from suffering. That when you encounter people with a smile, with a pat on the back, with a cold soda, or opening the door for them, or letting them get in front of you in traffic if they're trying to get over, if we can do stuff like that, that we can help liberate them from their suffering. Why? Well, what do we expect if we're in a bad place, right? We're expecting people to hurt us. We're expecting people not to be nice to us, right? The whole world is against us, right? Is what she's described in some of these situations. So just a very simple act of kindness, of love, of compassion might just be enough of a spark for that person to be open to the next act of kindness. So when they encounter this kindness, right, little by little, or in that moment, resentment might slowly be turned down or turned off. And that over time, they might change their behavior and their reaction in the world. And that we all have that ability to maybe light that spark or that fire in others. For the reasons, right, we've talked about, right, continued exposure to our positive influence, right, can help resentful individuals discover pleasure and freedom of loving without demanding anything in return, right, without any preconceived state of self-defense. And in these severe cases, obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. And none of us are expected or necessarily qualified, perhaps, to help cure people, right? We're not social workers. We're not psychologists. We're just, everyday human beings doing our own thing, walking our own trial. But we all have the ability to smile, be kind, and do good to other people. Make sense? So easy, right? But yes, so hard. Right? So be optimistic, she says, and always, always, always do your part to be an example of love. Right? Show patience and happiness to the world around you, right? Because your efforts in this life not only are going to help other people maybe have that spark that they need to look at the world differently, but remember, where you are today, able to smile and be kind and compassionate, that may not have been you 3 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 lifetimes ago. Every time that we share acts of kindness and compassion, love and peace, we're atoning for those mistakes from our past, right? We're working on evolving morally. We're working on correcting those wrongs that we may have made in the past. And the good news is in addition to helping others, we're also helping ourselves. And the biggest example she gives us, right, that she talks about here, ultimately to wrap this up, is how do you do this, right? What's the best way to learn to do this every day? What's the best way to practice this every day? Any idea what she said or the example she gave us? Right, Christ. Right, Christ walked the earth. He lived a human life, and he showed us how to live. He carried his cross, if you will. He suffered. He he forgave his executioners, right? He lived a life of love and compassion and kindness. And Joanna's teachings to us in this were simply um, do your best to be kind, to be loving, and follow the example of Christ. So I will leave you with that. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Livia, are you doing vibrations? Yes, wonderful. Thank you, everyone.